Chapter 51 to 55. Like this? No. Scat weaved runes through the air, before dismissing them and starting over. She seemed solely focused on her experiments that nothing could disturb her. I had explained to her my rune usage, my path I was taking and what spells I was developing. It was a surreal experience, watching her reverse engineer my spells from some basic hints. Usually I'm the one doing that. I only told her my thoughts and what I had created already, and she started trying to replicate them. Ensas into Kenas, then Rado? No, that wouldn't work either, they would diminish each other, unless... She quickly swiped her hand, allowing a spell to actualize. What did you call it? Fires of Muspelheim. She laughed, creating a massive torrent of flame in front of her, burning everything in that direction. I could only sigh. It had taken her less than an hour to recreate my spell. Your turn. Scat turned to me abruptly, hands on hips, expectant. Did she want to compare them? Whatever, let's just trample all over my self-esteem while we're at it. I activated my circuits, gathered my magical energy and actualized my runes. Foolish. She scoffed, flicking a rune into my sequence, disrupting the whole thing and making the magical energy go wild and disperse. Again. I grit my teeth and started up the spell sequence once again. I stared at her intently. As the spell was about to actualize, she moved. Another flicked towards me, but I dodged out of the way this time, only to blink as several more collided not just with my spell but my body as well, hurling me back into a snow pile. Foolish boy. She frowned. Do you think I am just disrupting you because I find it amusing? Yes. I said without hesitation. She raised an eyebrow as several more runes surrounded her. Only proving my point. I wiped the snow off my clothes, standing back up. Sadist. I muttered under my breath. Bang. Motherfucker. I blurted out, getting smacked in the head again, face planting back into the snow. You remind me of Satanta, one of my other students. She bore down on me. He often required that I beat my lessons into him. It is making me very nostalgic. That sounds about right for him. He probably just doubled down even then. I snorted. She tilted her head in confusion. You know my student? Oh right, she wouldn't know about that. He was summoned as a servant due to a ritual some mage families created, the Holy Grail. I waved my hand dismissively. Supposedly capable of granting a wish. What a ridiculous notion, of a wish, she scowled. How did he die? Well, she can read between the lines. As a hero, protecting someone close to me. At least, he did in many world lines, safe to assume he would go out in a blaze of glory here as well. If it weren't for him, Rin would have probably died in some iterations of the war. That foolish boy. She said quietly, a small smile on her face. The runes around her were dismissed, and her pressure returned to normal, her expression turning neutral. Answer my previous question, or you will be going back up the mountain. Her stern attitude returned. You were targeting specific parts of my spell, certain links in my runic sentence. Maybe they were weak points, easily disruptible, or maybe my sentence is flawed, bloated even, and you were picking off excess. She blinked at me, a small bit of surprise on her face. I suppose you are not as stupid as I first assumed. Gee, thanks. I can only hope to continue to live up to your praise. I deadpanned. Don't get wise with me, boyo. She took her spear, carving runes into the ground. Your runic sentences are needlessly complex, look. She gestured to the symbols on the ground with an astonishing speed, yet they were immaculately done. I walked over next to her, looking at them, mulling over the combinations. Wouldn't you want an Ingwa's rune here? I pointed in between a few runes. No, you are simply used to overthinking things. She shook her head. Dagas would provide the flames with steady growth, whereas adding Ingwas here would make the flames burn slightly hotter, but only for a split moment and then snuff out. I see, it would overload the spell's potential, without any meaningful effective increase. I understood where she was coming from. Yes, also this Thurisaz here, that is brilliant, I can't believe I did not notice it until now. To see my flaws so quickly, you truly are a master of your craft. I couldn't help but admit. Thurisaz has many meanings, one of which is giant. It has significance with Muspelheim as a whole, being that I was a realm that was home to a certain kind of giant race. Weaving in stronger concepts will make the spell stronger overall, especially if clutter is removed to make it actualize better. It's good you understand. She snorted. You have other spells, corresponding to the 9 realms, are they just as bad as this one? Probably worse. I admitted with a wince. You saw my shield spell before. Yes, that. She scowled. I will advise you to fix it out of my presence, lest I get the urge to beat you up for even creating something so pathetic. Well, she doesn't mince words, and it wasn't entirely unfair. Noted. Good. She stated. Now, fix them and cast each one 1,000 times. Did you just say 1,000 times? I stared at her in disbelief. Yes, 1,000 times, each. She nodded. If you want me to spread my legs, brat, you should be able to this much at a minimum. She laughed, walking away. Making a lot of assumptions there, is what I would like to say, but I am a healthy young man. She even swayed her hips as she left, bitch. I'm conflicted, Drake. I said, mesmerized by the sight. Being on the other side of the fence this time. Huh, I guess that does put it into perspective, with Meridia it was practically the opposite situation. The stubborn side of me doesn't want to give in, to give her the satisfaction. And what does the other side of you say? Them legs. Yeah, thought so. Alright, that's enough. Scat Hack appeared before more. How much time passed, I didn't know. Several days at the earliest, possibly over a week since I started casting. The days started to blend together at some point. I hadn't completed 1,000 for each spell yet. I rubbed my hands together, keeping them warm. It's enough. She dismissed my concerns. Your casting is up to an acceptable level now, we can move on to the next part. She withdrew a parchment, handing it over to me. I have made some notes regarding your spells. I looked it over, reading each line very carefully. You theorized the completed form of my 9 realms? I didn't really know what else to call this spell school. 9 realms, 9 spells. She had created 6 more spells for me, complete with their entire runic structure, and even had notes on their uses and thoughts on their inception. She used my bare thoughts to conceptualize these, merely the basis of my random ideas. Not only that, they were just about what I had envisioned as well. What a scary woman. I had some free time. She said nonchalantly. This was a very nice gesture. Thank you, teacher. Honestly, seeing this gentle side of her made it really hard to hold any kind of resentment, even knowing she would kick my ass later if I said or did something she didn't like. No need for that. She had a small smile on her face. I had one final thought regarding this method you are creating. You are missing one very important concept to link them all together. One final concept. Link them all together, oh. I see where you're going with this. I rubbed my chin, thinking it through. Yggdrasil, the world tree. The conceptual basis for the entirety of the Norse cosmology and what physically linked all the realms in that layer of reality. Good, but you will need to complete this yourself. I fear I may stymie your growth if I give you an answer here. She shook her head. I already theorized the other spells at a prior time, but I had to even consider this aspect. I guess she wouldn't completely give me any answer like that. Some time of linking mechanism. Perhaps to combine multiple spells together. No, that would grind under the original concept, the world tree links, but it doesn't combine. Maybe some sort of amplification, using the world tree as a basis to spread a single spell over a large distance, or maybe to just empower a single spell to an absurd level. There were many paths I could take here, much more testing was required. You have helped me a lot already. I waved the parchment. This has saved me many days of research. It matched my initial thoughts as well. This is more or less what I would have created when I had time and sat down. Very well. She didn't dwell on it any longer. Now, swing your sword 10,000 times. I just sighed. I guess we're back to this now. Yes, teacher. I expect perfect form on each swing, otherwise you will be starting over. You worked your mind and your magic, now you shall work your body. She said with no room for argument, not that I disagreed with her assessment. Finish this and we will spar again, I will even allow you to use your magic. Another spar, huh? Honestly, the thought was exciting, it was one of the best ways to get stronger. And I would be lying if I said that I don't enjoy fighting, I just hope I don't turn into a battle maniac in the future. I sprinted along the tundra, explosions erupting in my wake, magical attacks launched at obscene speeds, and I was barely managing to dodge. Slow. A shout was heard behind me, I narrowly ducked to avoid a bloodthirsty spear from impaling me from behind. My back foot pivoted, turning around I retaliated, sword lashing out towards the woman aiming for my life. Her feral grin almost made me waver, but I forced all my strength into my blow, locking against the shaft of her spear. Lightning cloak. My weapon crackled with power. Scat Hack looked surprised, jumping back, staring at me as she clutched her hand a few times. Cute. She narrowed her eyes, taking a few steps round me. I smirked, mimicking her movements in the other direction as we circled each other. My grip on Mirage tightened, and I moved. 10 birds. My blade flashed out, blades of magical energy flew out towards the immortal witch. I saw her adjust her grip on her spear, hand down near the tip, using it almost like a sword. With a full body motion, she swung her spear at the incoming barrage, her own version of sword phantoms collided with my attack, the air crackling with magical effects at the epicenter. Neither of us were deterred, our eyes stayed focused solely on each other. We moved at the same time, leaping through the air, spear meeting sword at our highest point. An explosion pulsed out, blowing away all debris and snow on the ground. Better. Scat Hack loudly declared, thrusting her spear several times in a blink of an eye. Do not stay flat-footed. Weave each movement into your follow-up attack, or use your footwork to retreat without opening yourself up. Her spear slipped past my guard, cutting into my shoulder, but she did not relent. It continued to pour onto me, the smallest opening was another wound on my body, and my clothes were already torn at this point, and I was bleeding from several places. I said don't stay flat-footed, she shouted, increasing her speed several notches and sweeping my legs out from under me. I didn't even have time to hit the ground before she pivoted and lashed out with her foot, sending me spiraling into the distance. The world around me spun, my body skipping across the ground before I could regain my footing. She wouldn't give me the chance to get back up. My danger sense was already telling me a lethal attack was heading for me again. I raised my sword up overhead, her spear slamming down like a club, the ground cracking under me from the blow. I think one of my ribs was broken, a sharp pain permeated my body from my chest. Did anyone ever tell you that men don't like abrasive women? I grit out, blood seeping from my mouth. What does a virgin boy like you know about women? She retorted, knee slamming into my chest, the exact spot I was hurting. She let go of her spear, grabbing my arm, pushing her shoulder into me, and flipping me over onto the ground. I rolled to the side, just barely dodging a spear form skewering a very important part of my lower body. Low blow. I shouted, getting up as quickly as I could to gain some distance. Scary fucking bitch. It's not like you would ever need it. She laughed. Already on my ass, spear lashing out. It took everything I had to deflect her incoming barrage, not even having a moment to retaliate. I stomped on the ground, erecting dozens of earthen walls between us, merely only good for buying the briefest of moments. I quickly took a handful of talismans out of my ring. I didn't sit idle before this spar, I prepared several things beforehand. Metal enriches water. I threw my first talisman up into the air. I saw the look on my teacher's face, she didn't recognize what I was doing, I guess she didn't read through that book when she had my stuff. Fuck. I spat out, dodging another spear strike. Was she keeping me from completing the creation cycle? She probably didn't know what it did, but for the intentions of training, she probably wasn't going to allow me to cast it without effort. My sword swept towards her haphazardly, almost like I had regressed a step. I saw her frown, about to tongue lash me, one of the few times she would pause in her assault. Water nurtures wood, I threw the second out into the sky, allowing the partial spell to further enhance. She narrowed her eyes at me, realizing I had tricked her. I smirked, lunging at her with a thrust, she stepped in, knocking my sword away with the shaft of her spear, flicking the butt of it at my head. It was practically instinct at this point to duck out of the way, but her knee caught my chin, knocking me off me feet. I felt the world spin around me, briefly dazed as my back hit the cold ground. I felt my hand empty, sword fallen down somewhere, I didn't have time to search for it, so I reached out and pulled Dawnbreaker from my ring. She came at me with a basic thrust, but her whole body was behind it, punishing me for staying flat-footed again. I had no choice but to meet her head-on. I grabbed Dawnbreaker with both hands, and with all my strength I swung down at the tip of her spear, knocking it into the dirt on her charge. This didn't stop her at all, she followed the movement, putting her own strength into the new direction her spear went and used it to pole vault up into the air, redirecting her spear with a spin, she twirled it up and swung down on me overhead. I didn't have time to bring up Dawnbreaker, I abandoned it in favor of summoning the boosted gear to use as a shield. My legs shuddered under the weight of the blow, she clearly put more into it than normal. I grit my teeth in annoyance. I didn't want to use the boosted gear in this spar. I planned on training with it later, but for now I just wanted to keep improving myself. Wood feeds fire, the words were forcibly pushed out, my talisman thrown to the side as it flew up into the air along with the others. Slowly actualizing the spell, way up in the air, piece by piece. Several more talismans enter my hand, different than the elemental ones used to forge the spell. I held them between my fingers and thrust towards Scat-Hack. She seemed to sense the danger. Removing one hand from her spear, she snaked her hand around my own, pushing my attack out of the way. It was the opening I needed to her own spear out from on top of me. I held my gauntlet up like a shield, and my other hand up to act as a sword. In fact, that's exactly what these talismen were doing. They became enhanced to a supernatural degree, sharper than most steel. Usually meant to be thrown, but I needed a makeshift weapon or the moment, and Ascalon was one of my final trump cards. I didn't want to reveal it just yet, even if she knew the blade itself existed. She prodded me, a quick thrust towards my head. I deflected with my gauntlet, following up with a swipe of my other hand. Teacher only took a half step back, allowing them to pass by her less than an inch. She spun on her heel, swinging her spear in a large arc towards the side opposite my gauntlet. It was no surprise how quickly she noticed my openings. I decided to do something stupid. I thrust towards her body, opting to allow her blow to land. She looked at me with no small amount of surprise on her face, slowing turning into a smile. I felt something in my arm crack as my talismans were halted a breath away from her chest, a single rune blocking them as they started to tear and fall to the ground. No doubt my arm was at the very least fractured. Nice try. She smirked, swinging her leg up towards my head. I clutched my hand, forcing another earth wall to erupt from the ground, hitting the bottom of her leg, disbalancing her. Fire dries earth. I threw another talisman, as the last entered my hand. And finally, earth refines metal. The last of the talismans shot into the air, finalizing the spell sequence. A visual phenomenon appears in the sky. Scat-Hack paused, easily recovering from my disruption of her rhythm, curiously looking up, then back down to me. Confusion written all over her face. Did you cast it correctly? With a last smile, I summoned all the runes around my hand, thrusting my arm to the sky. I think I finally got a serious reaction out of her. For the first time I could tell she felt a foreboding sense of danger. She didn't attack me, all I saw her do was flick her hand and summon her own runes. No time to dwell on it. The two spells harmonized, the talismans representing the Eastern creation cycle, bolstering my runic spell to an obscene degree. There was a resonance, similar concepts intertwined between the creation cycle and the application of my 9 realms. Both the basis of their cosmetology, the origins of life form where they originated. The first time I was casting this spell in combat. Light of Alfheim. The clouds parted, a massive pillar of light slammed down into the area, completely enveloping me and everything in the visible distance. I was fine. It was a spell that target all those I deemed as enemies. Take that, you old hag. I finally laughed, as the last vestiges of my spell finally faded, and the realm returned to eternal twilight. My laughing abruptly stopped as I saw Scat-Hack, standing there completely unharmed, a shield surrounding her. Primordial runes. She fending off my attack by utilizing primordial runes. I suppose I should take that as a compliment. She didn't answer, the clear dissatisfaction of my comment written on her face. Her spell faded and she gripped her spear, reeling her arm back. She threw it with all her might right at me. The ground shattered at the force of the spear sailing through the air, leaving a track of magical energy and bloodlust in its wake. It wasn't hard to dodge, but I fell on my butt out of instinct, letting it sail harmlessly past me. An old hag, am I? She took a step forward. Curious as to why you have been staring at this old hag's rear all this time then. She moved, extremely fast. I had no time to even stand up. Her foot was planted firmly on my chest, pushing me further into the ground. Those paper spells need work, they are too slow, but they have potential. Yeah, I need to practice them a bit more, weave them into my combat style. Any last words? She eyed me, putting just a bit more pressure on my chest, my ribs shuddering. I couldn't stop myself from wheezing. I think, you're awakening something in me. You have chosen poorly. She deadpanned. Wait. I shouted. She paused for a moment, looking down at me. For the record, I was staring at your legs. I smiled innocently. Death it is then. She held up her hand, and her demonic spear jutted out from where it had been thrown, crisscrossing through the air and returned to her hand. What the hell? How did you do that? She released me, stepping to the side. Do what? She didn't seem to understand. Summon your spear back like that, to control it so well through telekinesis. I cast a healing spell, holding it over my chest. It was not telekinesis, though I suppose it has similarities. It is an aspect of weapon refinement. She started, twirling her spear before stabbing it into the ground. Is this an avenue that interests you? She asked, clearly in teacher mode again, as opposed to kick my ass mode. Well yes, but I was talking specifically about how you could control it like that. Can you do more than that, say move it with your will in the air? If I exert much effort, I can move it about, but for a combat technique, it is lacking. She furrowed her brow, unsure of where I was going with this. Please teach me this, I think this is exactly what I've been looking for. This is not how I expected this sparring session to end, fighting almost non-stop for almost 2 days. But this may be exactly what I was looking for to help bridge my martial and magical abilities, to allow them to coexist in the same combat style. This is the issue. I gestured with my hand, a sword flew out of the ground towards me, I caught it with ease, but its movement was too static, unmoving. I did the equivalent of wrapping an invisible lasso around it and yanked it toward me. Scat tapped her finger against her chin, squatting down and poking at another sword I had stabbed into the ground. Do it again. I shrugged, tossing the sword into the ground a distance away and pulled it to me again with telekinesis. Wrap it in your magical energy and keep it floating in front of you. She said, standing up and walking next to me. I did as she said, allowing Mirage to float in front of me, as my magical energy wrapped around it like a blanket. Clearly, movement is not the problem, at least one-dimensionally. I've used it in the past, thrown one of my swords and guided it with telekinesis and such, but never for any maneuvers beyond straight lines. She stared at it for a moment, muttering something under her breath, then gave it a flick. The sword flew out of my control and landed on the ground. Conceptually, it may be different due to the weapons used. A spear is meant to be thrown, so it may be more open to manipulation this way. I started thinking out loud. It shouldn't be impossible. I've heard stories of similar things in the East, swordsmen who could control their swords with their wills in a far-off era. Yeah, Taoism and the like were very popular in the distant era. There were many stories of those people using swords in some magical ways. I started pacing, taking another look at my hovering sword and walked back and forth. I made sure not to lose focus and keep the weapon suspended. Now what, Abu? Smack. Son of a bitch, I clutched the side of my head, falling to the ground. What the hell? Scat stood over me, looking down, frowning. Your pacing was distracting me. Her lips curled up. I guess we can discard some kind of mental limitation. I let out a breath, calming down. I suppose she was testing to see if I would subconsciously do something with the sword to block her attack. Or maybe she just liked to beat me up, both are plausible explanations. She ignored me, going back to the hover sword, squatting down and looking at it intently. I could tell she was clearly focused, possibly thinking of solutions. I smiled lightly, with all the force I could muster. I slammed the hovering sword into the ground, kicking up all the snow around it. Scat slowly stood up, wiping the snow from her face. If you wanted to bleed some more, you merely had to ask. Her voice was even, which only added even more presence to her words. We'll see who's bleeding after this. I grabbed my sword, raising it up. It would definitely be me, but I refused to back down. I whipped some dried blood off my forehead from the previous bout, when sudden realization hit me. I think Scat noticed something too, because she looked less bloodthirsty and stared more inquisitive towards the red spotted liquid on my hand. Blood. She said. Blood. I nodded. Her breadth of knowledge was truly impressive. She could arrive at the same conclusion so quickly as I did. Blood is the answer. I did something with my first sword a while back. I soaked it in my blood to make it a better catalyst. But that won't be enough. If it was merely an issue of blood, such a technique would be more readily available. She shook her head. You must create a stronger bond with the weapons you wish to utilize. I could perform such actions because I personally forged these spears after slaying the beast from whence they originated. Not an option for me. I frowned slightly. No way was I going to try and reforge Mirage, and I doubt Dawnbreaker could even be reforged, let alone Ascalon, a noble phantasm. I took a look inside my ring, mentally looking over everything, and certain ideas began to form. I have a thought. I stated, withdrawing a couple books. Scat stepped over, taking them in hand, and started to flip the pages over quickly enough. I saw her do something with a rune, seemingly so she could read the language of the texts. This is the spell you used earlier, she stated, continuing reading. I see. Lighting Cloak was the spell book she was holding. To imbue my weapon with lightning, a very basic spell on the surface, but it held a surprising amount of depth. Basically, a temporary enchantment, the only issue is using my blood instead of lightning and making it more permanent. My refining methods, you wish to learn them? She looked at me, waiting for an answer. I want to know everything you're willing to teach, I replied honestly. She smiled, it was a very genuine and beautiful smile, devoid of any spiteful feeling she had moments prior. I will show you how I forged my spears then. Interesting design. Scat looked over my enchanting table. She had given me a rundown on how her forging process went, her additions over the years and other things she's tinkered with in the past. I don't know how much time had passed, but we had somehow migrated back to the castle. In one of her storerooms she kept many materials and other objects. Taking the concepts used in Lightning Cloak, replacing the lightning with my blood, and using the enchanting table to make the effect stick. Mirage sat on the table, it was the easiest to do first, to refine the weapon, add my touch onto it so it was more susceptible to my control. This was by no means my area of expertise, in fact my experience could be summarized as dabbling throughout both my lives. Lights filled the room, my enchanting table lit up each runes and my sword was drinking in the multitude of colors. My blood seeped down into the grooves of the table, spilling off the blade as it drank up almost all the excess. But it didn't take hold, the magical energy had gathered and fluttered out, the enchanting failed. Do you know what you did wrong? She asked, peering over my shoulder. This wasn't something I was specialized in, even my general knowledge was lacking, frankly she was the expert here. I have a few ideas. Good, try again, she stated, not giving any advice, but ushering me to continue. I nodded, focusing again on my enchanting. I ran a finger along the flat of my sword, thinking about how to proceed. Is it merely a matter of too much blood, or maybe not enough? I willingly cut myself, allowing blood to drip out into a wooden bowl, filling it up about halfway. This time, I would try less blood, less magical energy and do it slowly. My enchanting started, but I could feel the effects not taking hold almost immediately, different from before where it all kinda puffed out, this just wouldn't even start. Failure, I said, dismissing it all. What if I changed on my application? Instead of trying to cast the spell over the sword and thus making it a permanent enchantment, why don't I try enchanting it with my blood then casting the spell? Failure. Perhaps another wrong sequence of applications? Let's try casting the original spell, then try changing it during the enchantment process. Failure. Let's adjust a few things and try that sequence again. I felt as if the process did something different and want to watch it again. Failure. Stupid, it merely prolonged the disruption between the magical energy and the materials. But now I know the threshold to work with. Failure. What about using some ancillary materials? Soul stones, perhaps? Failure. Maybe it's an issue of not enough magical energy after finding the correct ratio of blood? What could go wrong with flooding in more? Failure. What if I? Failure. How about? Failure. Maybe. Failure. How long had I been at this? Time seemed to lose meaning in this realm and it was difficult to keep track. Especially with how focused I was, I lost track of how many times I tried this enchantment to refine this sword so it would obey my commands. I felt hair touching my face as Scat leaned over my shoulder, close enough that I could hear her breathing, as she started to direct me. Here, she said quietly. You are losing much of the process from magical leakage. A normal enchantment from this table would not suffer this issue, but you are combining the application of a spell, modifying it with your blood, and forcibly attaching it to your weapon. She gently drew a rune over my sword, seeing it pulse ever so slightly I could see it having an effect on my weapon. We oftentimes look over the simplest solutions. She withdrew, standing off to the side, giving me an encouraging smile. I held back a sigh, realizing what I had been doing wrong at this point. I didn't want to get distracted, so I focused back on my table, regardless of how many times I failed. For some reason I was feeling rather confident now. How much blood had I spilt for this little project at this point? Once more, I poured my blood over my sword, allowing it to drink it up for the enchantment. This time, though, my magical energy swirled around the sword instead of merely being applied like it was filling every nook and cranny. I could see the immediate difference in what was happening. It seemed obvious in hindsight, but I just simply did not think of it during this time. There was no thunderous sound to applaud my success, but as it all finalized my sword just pulsed slightly, taking in the enchantment. I stood up, almost not daring to touch my sword. Moment of truth. I reached out with my telekinesis. It was merely a bridging of intent. Once I connected to my sword, the spell wasn't necessary. The enchantment did most of the work. I merely needed to activate it. My sword lifted off the ground, and I gestured with my hand for it to fly up and down, and I spun my hand in a circle, only to watch with amazement as the sword followed my commands. Well done. Scat Hack sneaked up on me. I couldn't help but turn around and wrap my hands around her in a hug. I did it. It was only when I heard a soft giggle in my ear that I realized what I was doing, quickly separating from her. Smooth, Will, smooth. Forgot myself for a moment, don't even know how long I had been at this, and then it was finished, and I will ignore how nice she smelled. When was the last time I accomplished something after working on it so diligently? It was an exhilarating feeling. Scat Hack looked at me, an amused smile on her face. Good, now since our last sparring was interrupted, we make up these past few days with another one. Few days. God damn, no wonder my back felt stiff. Well, I really do want to test this out. And I'm never really against sparring with someone stronger than me, case in point, Artoria and Sasaki Kojiro. Let's hope you can keep that confidence. She smirked. Because you will not be allowed to touch your weapons throughout. Regrets? Many. That's fine, you'll need the handicap. When in doubt, double down. A vicious grin emerged on her face, one that promised quite a bit of pain. My little student, all grown up. I guess I will not need to hold back anymore. She turned around, flipping her hair back and walking out the door. You fucked up. I may have fucked up. I stared at my teacher. The environment around us was completely destroyed. Craters littered the ground, any kind of foliage was devastated, and nothing more than scraps. There were places charred from intense flames, other places where ice had exploded out in hazardous thorns. My clothes were ragged, my breathing was uneven and sweat mixed with blood as it dripped down my face. A white light emitted from my hand, holding it up to my face to heal my swollen eye so I could see better. Scat Hack walked towards me, each step the same length, almost like a predator who finally cornered their prey. Despite the lackadaisical nature of her movements, there were absolutely no openings for me to exploit. This woman had not been going all out, but certainly not been going easy on me either. My body ached and hurt in every which place. Not to mention several times she had just stabbed me without any remorse. Regret making her go this hard? I heard my partner ask. My lips curled up, even with my heavy breathing, I couldn't help but smile. Never. Well said. Drake mirrored my sentiments. Is that all you got? I shouted the distance towards her menacing figure. My sword slowly circled around me, never touching the ground. Ascalon. Mirage. Dawnbreaker. I relied on them heavily before, but now, I felt like I was the one in control. My connection to them, it gave me a certain confidence. I steadied my legs, they were a little shaky, but I had enough in me to keep going. Lightning danced across my hands, perhaps one of my favorite elements, one I defaulted to quite easily. I gestured with my hand and my 3 swords shot off like meteors, 1 from above and 2 from the side. How much trial and error did it take to come this far? Teacher quite literally beat the techniques into me as we continued to spar until it reached a satisfactory level, according to her. Well, stabbed the techniques into me, mostly. She deflected them with ease, even as their trajectory was disrupted, and their forms going flying in every which way. It merely took a thought to grab them again, bringing them back towards me, with lightning flying towards her face. Scat Hack leaned down, ignoring my spells as they harmlessly passed over here, and she broke into a sprint that displaced all the snow around her, and a shockwave appeared where she had been previously. So fast, and this wasn't even her fastest. Her spear was in front of my eyes, I narrowly dodged, her spear slicing the side of my head, blood flowing through the thin line opened up. I moved towards her, our faces only a breath apart, my hand moving up to grab her spear. She quickly shot her knee towards my chest, only for her to pull back as Ascalon rocketed from the side, ready to skewer her leg if she continued the attack. She was quick to adjust her footing, allowing it to pass in between us, only the fabrics on her clothing to get the slightest bit severed on its passing. Scat Hack narrowed her eyes, casting a rune with such speed that I barely even noticed, taking the initiative to flick it towards Dawnbreaker before I could follow up on my attack. The spell collided with my sword, enveloping it in magical energy, and forcing it to drop to the ground. I could feel my connection to it still, but all my effort to call it were met with insane resistance. Was it a gravitational increase? I had no experience dealing with such a thing, not something I could unravel at moment's notice in this situation. Definitely something I'll need to be conscious of in the future. Lightning cloak. I smirked at her as my hand holding her spear erupted in magical lightning. I saw her grit her teeth, refusing to let go of her spear, and I used every strengthening spell I knew to keep it held back. She dug her feet into the ground, and her free fist went straight for my face. I caught it with my palm, the force made me almost shudder and I felt my hand getting numb at the initially contact. With a thought, my final sword flew towards the back of her head. I did not expect such an attack to work on a woman whose instinct and ability had been honed over the course of thousands of years. So it didn't surprise me when she slightly moved her head to the side, letting it pass by without even breaking eye contact. But she must have noticed something amiss when I smirked, letting go of her fist and grabbing the hilt before it could fully fly by. I then slashed down at her, redirecting all the momentum. Her pupils dilated ever so slightly, her attack retreated, and a rune appeared in her open palm as she used it to block my sword. A primordial rune. The second time I've forced her to use them so blatantly. It wasn't actualized in a large capacity, merely used to absolutely defend against my singular attack. I could only speculate on the uses and requirements for her to cast such a powerful spell. I was currently working on the theory that they took a heavy toll to produce. This was it. I let go of her spear. She noticed immediately, moving her nimble leg up to probably intercept me and disrupt my own attack. Except... Splat. She stopped. I stopped. I think she took a moment to reboot, trying to realize what just happened. Half her face was now covered in snow. Did you just? She finally said. I think that counts as a solid hit. I chuckled. I had conjured a snowball in my open hand and tossed it at her face in that small opening. She, who had been spreading her awareness out to an obscene degree to notice any attack coming at her. Lethal blades showering down on her, magical attacks that would destroy the land coming from angles she couldn't perceive. And I merely threw a snowball in between all of that. Was it any wonder why she was confused? A hit is a hit. No danger to her, no killing intent. I doubted it would even register on her radar in the middle of a spar. You. She reached up, and grabbed my cheeks. You cheeky brat, she pulled. My legs finally gave out as I fell to the ground pulling her with me. She made a sound I could only describe as cute. I could feel her breath on my cheek, her nose almost touching mine. You have made great progress. She said quietly, eyes not leaving mine. It was an honest compliment, one I couldn't help but take pride in her words. It seemed hard to gauge how much stronger I became when she just continued to stay at a pace that was just above mine regardless of what I did. It just went to show what a monster this woman was. You can get off me now. I responded, turning my eyes away. I definitely was not blushing. What if I don't wish to move? I can't feel my lower body. I quickly said. Don't worry, there's not much to feel down here. She wiggled her butt over my groin for added effect. Ouch. Drake chimed in, sharing my sentiments. What's sharper, her spear or her tongue? Scat Hakka's lips curled into a smirk, laughter escaped her lips. You dare tease your teacher, huh? She poked my cheek. A snowball? I ought to beat your arse for that. Well, turnabout is fair play I suppose. On the other hand, I grabbed 2 handfuls of snow and smushed them against her face. Brat. She flicked my forehead, a small smile on her face, amusement clear in her eyes. Fine, fine. I will allow you a moment's respite due to your progress. We shall convene again on the morrow. She slowly began to sit up, but I yanked her back down. She caught herself, hands digging into the snow to prop herself up over me. What if I don't want you to go? I raised an eyebrow. You play a dangerous game, boyo. Her tone lacking her usual aloofness. There was something else mixed in, her face wasn't so hardened, perhaps even possessing a small bit of longing, but she also was hesitant. I seem to recall you starting this game. She shied away first, slowly pulling herself up, and I didn't stop her this time. Let us end this here. She stood up, wiping the snow from her body. Take the remainder of the day to yourself. She said quietly, before walking away. Geez, what am I even doing? I sat up, staring at my empty surroundings. I cast another healing spell, hovering over myself, feeling the warm sensation flow through my body. Oh gods, that feels amazing. I didn't realize how much I was forcing myself at the end there. Her days-long sparring sessions are brutal. Did I do something wrong, Drake? I let my body fall back into the snow, staring up at the clouded sky. I don't think there's any right or wrong there, just choices to be made. Why do I feel so conflicted then? I sighed, not knowing how to handle this situation. Whatever, let's go beat some undead up, we can take the opportunity to train again. The time I could sneak away to train with the boosted gear was not much. Not that I was keeping it a secret, but it wasn't really something she could help with much, so we never really focused on it much. Alright. I can feel it, we're getting close, maybe we can take those 1 to 2 steps needed to reach balance breaker today. And I can focus on just beating up undead things instead of worrying about other nonsense for now. Look, what if we change the design? You want to achieve a subspecies for the scale male? Not even having achieved balance breaker for a month and you're already wanting something different. I pushed myself up off the ground, arm shaking as it was the only thing keeping me from falling on my face. I blew in front of my face to clear a few strands of hair out of my eyes as my arm bent down and my nose just barely touched the ground, only to push myself up again. Not a subspecies, I like how the original scale male works, I want to change out it looks, cosmetically. I breathed out, continuing my push-ups. A subspecies, it was a description on sacred gears. Essentially, they can change based on their user's needs and desires, becoming something unique to that current wielder, thus called a subspecies. For instance, if Drake's scale male, his balance breaker, evolved to grow multiple arms to allow me to wield all my swords, that would be a subspecies of his balance breaker then. It would a specific addition or alteration unique to me across all his wielders. My eyes looked up towards Drake, or rather the gauntlet sitting on a table with Scathack as she kicked her feet up and was reading one of the spell books I brought with me. The one on my OG arts, she was curious about that particular school of magecraft and wanted to understand it better. She probably shares similar thoughts with me in this regard, new information is always interesting. I actually asked her to take Drake out, I wanted to see the process by which she did it. And Drake enjoyed being out and about sometimes as well, actually being able to have conversations with other people, or just Scathack. It didn't hurt me any, and why not make my partner happy when I can? What makes you think I can even do that? The gem on the gauntlet lit up as his words echoed out. You told me some restrictions were loosened, I'm just taking a shot in the dark here. Not end of the world if this doesn't work, but may as well see what options I have. That design is iconic, everyone knows it belongs to me. Well, that's not a denial. I'm not dissing your look, I'm just saying, it isn't optimal for me, it's too bulky. Are you calling me fat? Yes. I said without hesitation, unable to stop myself from smiling. More weight. More weight? Scathack looked up from her book. More weight. He confirmed. Scathack nodded, picking up a large boulder sitting next to her chair and tossed it on the one already weighing down on my back. Dick! I shouted as the weight almost made me collapse. I was about to bring my other hand down to catch myself but... Either keep one hand off the ground or you can lose one permanently. Scathack didn't even look up, flipping another page. Yes ma'am. Oh, take his right, that's the one he uses to. Shut up you fat dragon. I quickly cut him off. I'll paint the boosted gear white and call it divine boosting, don't test me. I dare you. Boys. Scathack interrupted, not even raising her voice. Fine. I calmed down. But seriously, it's not good if I'm going to be wielding a sword. What's wrong with it? You did fine against that dragon before. Please, I could have beat it up with a ladle and the results would have been the same. I rolled my eyes. It was designed for a brawler, how many wielders of yours were proper martial artists or did more than just punch things harder? I hate that you have a point. He conceded. Yeah, the vast majority of his previous wielders joined the club of let's punch things as hard as possible. It wasn't particularly their fault, the boosted gear lent itself towards that development right from the get-go. Adding on to the fact that almost all his previous wielders started out as mundane humans, they didn't really have any other options at the start. Sacred gears usually awaken under great stress, not many mundanes are going to take the time to learn something like martial arts or swordsmanship if their lives are being threatened like that. Fastest way to power was the way to go for the majority. Look, I'm not trying to remove your style, it will still be similar, just less bulky and more armorish-y, to be more like actual armor and not like a Gundam. Like the spikes at the elbows? They limit my full range of motion and interfere with my sword. Have you ever heard about elegance in simplicity? Don't get me wrong, I actually like how the balance breaker looks, but it's just not practical for me. Changing it into something resembling armor is the best course of action. I already have a few thoughts in my head on how to go about it. Fine, I will consider your words, draw me some sketches and maybe I will change the design. Drake grumbled. I'm sure we can find something you like and will work well with my abilities. What are you up to? Scat Hack asked. Just past 1300. I replied, pushing myself up. You were supposed to do 1,000. She just stared up, blinking. I shook the rocks off of me with a loud thump and stood up. My arms were sore and I moved them around to get the stiffness out. Nah. I shrugged. She just shook her head with a small smile on her face. Well, that is a good warm-up I suppose. She reached out and her spear jetted towards her open palm. Prepare yourself. I smiled, letting my swords fly out. I leaned back, enjoying the feeling of hot water washing over my entire body. The feeling of my bruises being subsumed under the warmth was something I couldn't quite describe. There was a hot spring behind Teacher's Castle, and I apparently just now found out, after being here almost a year because someone didn't tell me. Bitch. How's the water? I opened my eyes, looking up, unable to keep the surprise off my face. My teacher stood there, Scat Hack, right above me, completely naked. Error. Reboot in progress. How long do you intend to stare? She laughed, walking over to the ledge and dipping her feet in. It would be difficult to describe how beautiful this woman was. And the confidence she walked around under my gaze, she truly did not feel any amount of shyness to be naked in front of me. As long as I can. I shot back. On a side note, that illusion did do her justice. Her lips curled up, amused at my words. Perhaps there is hope for you yet. She slid down into the water, allowing her ample cleavage to stay just above the water line. I have seen heaven, death no longer scares me. Look, what if we change the design? You want to achieve a subspecies for the scale male? Not even having achieved balance breaker for a month and you're already wanting something different. I pushed myself up off the ground, arms shaking as it was the only thing keeping me from falling on my face. I blew in front of my face to clear a few strands of hair out of my eyes as my arm bent down and my nose just barely touched the ground, only to push myself up again. Not a subspecies, I like how the original scale male works, I want to change out it looks, cosmetically. I breathed out, continuing my push-ups. A subspecies, it was a description on sacred gears. Essentially, they can change based on their user's needs and desires, becoming something unique to that current wielder, thus called a subspecies. For instance, if Drake's scale male, his balance breaker, evolved to grow multiple arms to allow me to wield all my swords, that would be a subspecies of his balance breaker then. It would a specific addition or alteration unique to me across all his wielders. My eyes looked up towards Drake, or rather the gauntlet sitting on a table with Scat Hack as she kicked her feet up and was reading one of the spell books I brought with me. The one on Onmyoji Arts, she was curious about that particular school of magecraft and wanted to understand it better. She probably shares similar thoughts with me in this regard, new information is always interesting. I actually asked her to take Drake out, I wanted to see the process by which she did it. And Drake enjoyed being out and about sometimes as well, actually being able to have conversations with other people, or just Scat Hack. It didn't hurt me any, and why not make my partner happy when I can? What makes you think I can even do that? The gem on the gauntlet lit up as his words echoed out. You told me some restrictions were loosened, I'm just taking a shot in the dark here. Not end of the world if this doesn't work, but may as well see what options I have. That design is iconic, everyone knows it belongs to me. Well, that's not a denial. I'm not dissing your look, I'm just saying, it isn't optimal for me, it's too bulky. Are you calling me fat? Yes. I said without hesitation, unable to stop myself from smiling. More weight. More weight? Scat Hack looked up from her book. More weight. He confirmed. Scat Hack nodded, picking up a large boulder sitting next to her chair and tossed it on the one already weighing down on my back. Dick. I shouted as the weight almost made me collapse. I was about to bring my other hand down to catch myself but... Either keep one hand off the ground or you can lose one permanently. Scat Hack didn't even look up, flipping another page. Yes ma'am. Oh, take his right, that's the one he uses too. Shut up, you fat dragon. I quickly cut him off. I'll paint the boosted gear white and call it divine boosting, don't test me. I dare you. Boys. Scat Hack interrupted, not even raising her voice. Fine. I calmed down. But seriously, it's not good if I'm going to be wielding a sword. What's wrong with it? You did fine against that dragon before. Please, I could have beat it up with a ladle and the results would have been the same. I rolled my eyes. It was designed for a brawler. How many wielders of yours were proper martial artists or did more than just punch things harder? I hate that you have a point. He conceded. Yeah, the vast majority of his previous wielders joined the club of let's punch things as hard as possible. It wasn't particularly their fault, the boosted gear lent itself towards that development right from the get-go. Adding on to the fact that almost all his previous wielders started out as mundane humans, they didn't really have any other options at the start. Sacred gears usually awaken under great stress. Not many mundanes are going to take the time to learn something like martial arts or swordsmanship if their lives are being threatened like that. Fastest way to power was the way to go for the majority. Look, I'm not trying to remove your style, it will still be similar, just less bulky and more armorish, to be more like actual armor and not like a Gundam. Like the spikes at the elbows? They limit my full range of motion and interfere with my sword. Have you ever heard about elegance in simplicity? Don't get me wrong, I actually like how the balance breaker looks, but it's just not practical for me. Changing it into something resembling armor is the best course of action. I already have a few thoughts in my head on how to go about it. Fine, I will consider your words, draw me some sketches and maybe I will change the design. Drake grumbled. I'm sure we can find something you like and will work well with my abilities. What are you up to? Scat Hack asked. Just past 1300. I replied, pushing myself up. You were supposed to do 1,000. She just stared up, blinking. I shook the rocks off of me with a loud thump and stood up, my arms were sore and I moved them around to get the stiffness out. Nah. I shrugged. She just shook her head with a small smile on her face. Well, that is a good warm-up I suppose. She reached out and her spear jetted towards her open palm. Prepare yourself. I smiled, letting my swords fly out. I leaned back, enjoying the feeling of hot water washing over my entire body. The feeling of my bruises being subsumed under the warmth was something I couldn't quite describe. There was a hot spring behind Teacher's Castle, and I apparently just now found out, after being here almost a year because someone didn't tell me. Bitch. How's the water? I opened my eyes, looking up, unable to keep the surprise off my face. My teacher stood there, Scat Hack, right above me, completely naked. Error. Reboot in progress. How long do you intend to stare? She laughed, walking over to the ledge and dipping her feet in. It would be difficult to describe how beautiful this woman was. And the confidence she walked around under my gaze, she truly did not feel any amount of shyness to be naked in front of me. As long as I can. I shot back. On a side note, that illusion did do her justice. Her lips curled up, amused at my words. Perhaps there is hope for you yet. She slid down into the water, allowing her ample cleavage to stay just above the water line. I have seen heaven, death no longer scares me. Are you just here to tease me? I asked, turning my gaze away, but the image was forever burned into my mind. I doubt any healthy men with a desire for the fairer sex would forget something like that. Perhaps it is just a side benefit. She smirked, scooting closer to me. Does it make you uncomfortable? She said shyly, using her arms to push her breasts together. Her eyes locked with mine for a moment before she broke down and started laughing. You're so similar to Satanta yet so different, he wouldn't have waited even a moment to jump me. Don't compare me to that mutt. I scowled. The very epitome of every hole is a goal. I thought with a certain part of my body, often, but I at least had some standards. Shall I also teach you my friendship of the thighs then? She stood up, looking right at me. Isn't that what you said before, you were taken by my legs? She gave a sultry look. It is my duty to teach you everything I can. I don't know how to answer that question. I don't think I've ever been in a situation like this before, and I find myself uncertain on how to proceed. I'm no stranger to a woman's touch, but this was just something else. I believe I owe you a reward after all. She got close enough to whisper in my ear. How about it, do you wish to share my bed tonight? You merely have to say the words. Was she trying to get me to give in? Was it just some sort of game to her? I was tempted, I so tempted, but I also had my own pride. I turned to face her, my hand coming up to gently caress her cheek. Our faces were a breath apart. Gently, I placed my lips against hers for a brief moment. No thank you, I replied, breaking away. The look on her face was one I would treasure, the look of utter bewilderment at my declaration. Has anyone ever said no to her like this? I'm sure she's used to any man she propositions to practically jump at the chance. Hell, it took a lot more willpower than I was willing to admit to decline. Even so, I couldn't help but smile at her dumbfounded expression. I'm proud of you. Drake said I got out of the hot springs, leaving my teacher to her own thoughts. Though I am curious as to why you didn't, you know. Fuck. I couldn't help but chuckle. I'm not a child, I said, shaking my head. But to be honest, I'm not 100% sure myself. I think it just feels kind of cheap, like she wasn't really into it beyond pure fucking, and if we crossed that line, I don't think I could stop myself from falling, and it would make our relationship awkward if it was just my one-sided affections. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.